everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to today's training, Identity and Remote Work, How Do You Stay Secure? My name is Emily Jarvis, and I'm the Senior Events Manager here at GovLoop, and thank you so much for joining me, and a special thank you to our partners at Identity Automation for helping us put on this training today. So let's not waste any time and get to the good content, because we know millions of government employees became remote workers overnight due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The day-to-day operations for city, state, and federal operations radically transformed during that time, and the rapid move to telework put enormous pressure on IT personnel and resources to enable secure remote access to critical resources to meet mission objectives. So how did they do it? What worked? What didn't? Today we've got two wonderful experts who will share how identity and access management solutions can help organizations build a security framework as they work remotely and when they return to the office. But before we get to that wonderful content, I do have a few housekeeping items to go over with you. If you're on Twitter, please share what you learn using the hashtag GLTrain. On the console, we have some wonderful resources available for you to download, including this slide deck, so make sure you check those out. We hope you don't have any technical difficulties, but if you do, send us a message to that Attendee Questions tab to the right of your console, and my colleague Maddie will make sure to get all of your questions answered. It's in that same portal where you can ask our experts questions, and don't you dare be shy. Put your questions in early and often. Please take a moment to fill out the feedback survey located in the Resources tab on the right-hand side of your console. We appreciate your feedback as we look for small ways to improve our online trainings. Finally, we are recording this training and we'll email you a link to the on-demand version tomorrow so you can view it again or share it with one of your colleagues. All right, with all of that pesky housekeeping out of the way, let me introduce you to today's experts. Joining us is Randy Kress. Randy is the CIO and Assistant County Manager for Rowan County, North Carolina. He has been with that organization for 25 years in information technology. Randy is a board member of the North Carolina Local Government Information Systems Association, which fosters collaboration and sharing of technical knowledge among North Carolina local governments and school systems. He serves as the association's IT strike team leader for North Carolina Western region, responding to natural and cyber events across the state. We also have Kevin Satterfield. Kevin is the solutions architect at Identity and Automation. He has experience in focused delivery for multi-factor authentication to state and local governments. Kevin enjoys spreading knowledge and showing others the power of cloud technology. He's an active member of the AWS community with interests in serverless web applications, containerization, and VDIs. These two are clearly experts in their field, and we are thrilled to have them both with us today. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking and hand things over to Randy. So Randy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emily. I do appreciate that. Good afternoon, everybody. Just wanted to start off by, yes, that was the correct pronunciation of Rowan County, at least for North Carolina. I know there is another pronunciation for the Kentucky version, so thank you. So a little bit about Rowan County before I get in, and I was just thinking about this and looking back over my notes, and I felt like it was more of a year in review discussion that I would have, but then realized it's only been about 8 weeks. So that's one piece of this that's very interesting, is how much work we've looked at, and I'm sure everybody else has as well. So for Rowan County, we're in the central Piedmont region of North Carolina. We have a population of just over 141,000. And from Rowan County local government, we support, from an IT perspective, over 22 departments with a centralized model. So that does include our sheriff's office, emergency services, our health department, which has been a huge contributor to providing information throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, our social services, our libraries, tax, parks, and airport, and then in addition to just normal operations of human resources, finance, and our county manager's office and board of commissioners. With that, we support...
Hey, Randy?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Your audio is coming in a little in and out for us, just a tiny bit, and we were having a hard time understanding you, and I know you're sharing such great information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you hang up and call right back in, and while we do, we're going to go to Kevin's presentation, and then we'll end with you this time. That way we hear you and get all your great content.
Thank you so much. All right, bye-bye.
All right. Kevin, I'm throwing things to you a little bit early here, so apologies, but can you share with us and our audience, how identity automation thinks about remote work and how to create this new normal in the world that we are living in right now?
Hey, thanks, Emily. Yeah, and I absolutely can. I think to what, Randy just went through, welcome to working remote in 2020, everyone. I think one second everything looks good, and the next, you're losing connection. And that, for better or for worse, I think is a good segue into what we're talking about today. And I think what Randy will allude to a little bit more when he hops back on is, the challenges that we face now as people move out of offices and central locations and are now accessing internal or, high value resources from home, and what that looks like to not only the end user, but also to, the administrators and anyone else really that is involved. And I think the thing that we look at from our side in identity automation is we are a complete identity provider. So this isn't necessarily something new to us, but it's something that's very new to most of our current customers and most of our, prospects and people that are really looking to advance their security posture. And where that comes into play, I think, is a pretty long journey, and it's cyclical for most organizations, where, ultimately you have complete identity governance and administration, as we see on the left. But really, where we're focusing now, I think, in this current, climate that we're operating in, is within access management specifically. So having the pieces to the puzzle and, onboarding a person is great, and being able to, get them provisioned is wonderful. But right now, it seems to be more about access for people and getting people access to the resources they need or the resources they are used to getting access to. So when we think about that, we really start focusing in on access management, single sign-on, MFA, and even privileged access management if you need to elevate someone's credentials. And when we look at organizations as a whole and where they are, we use something called the maturity model. And I know we have some people on here from CMMC. This looks really familiar to you guys. And where we drop in when we talk about, people working remote and gaining access to resources is pretty low on the maturity model, actually. It's something that's obtainable. It's something that a lot of organizations, if they don't already have something in place, they have the capability to do so. So I think for all of us, it is a good thing that MFA is pretty low on the rung and something that people can knock out with, just a couple workflows or some infrastructure in place. And with that in mind, there is a lot of confusion that I think people have about, where do I use MFA? How do I use it? What users have to use it? And those are all questions that can really be unique to organizations as they mature through these models. But the first one, and I think what Randy can attest to specifically from his side, is with virtual desktops and virtual private networks. So I think the thing that a lot of people have done, and rightfully so, have expanded their remote access. So as users leave the office and have to get back in from home, one of the easiest ways that's been for people is to leverage, virtual infrastructure. So to, grow or expand maybe their existing virtual private network, like a Cisco AnyConnect or a Palo Alto or a NetMotion, and start bringing in, maybe users that historically would have not used those VPNs. They're bringing people on like that. Or like in Randy's case, where they have really moved to a step beyond that with VDI technology and actually giving users, access to applications and desktops virtually from their own devices and from home. And where specifically identity automation is focused in there is how do those, those new users, those people that are leaving the office and are connecting through a VPN or a VDI, how do they still have some level of security? Because now we've foregone that physical access that maybe used to be a door access badge or, a security gate that you pass through. And now we're just saying all you have to do is, open the lid on that laptop and potentially you could have access to the same resources. And for a lot of reasons that, makes people concerned. So the next step, I think, for a lot of organizations is how do they secure that remote access? And with both VDIs and VPNs, if you leverage, any form of authentication, not only ours, but other potential use cases, you can increase that security. And I think the easiest way for most people is to leverage what we refer to as push notifications or mobile OTP. And I think we have a quick clip of it here, or just a shot of our app. And this is something where you don't need hardware. So I don't need to give people, PKI smart cards or FIDO tokens. But what I can do is I can say, we need to have some form of advanced authentication on those remote endpoints. So those VDIs that people are getting into or those VPNs are getting into. A really easy way to increase security is to put some type of two-factor authentication in front of those access points. And leveraging the Rapid Identity mobile app, you do have access to not only one-time passwords, but also push notifications. So you can go from a traditional, username and password environment where people are just logging in with knowledge-based credentials, where maybe historically, I was going into an actual office building and I was tapping in, so that was okay. Now I need something additional. I need some form of authentication that is stronger than just knowledge-based username and password. Mobile apps, in particular, are the ones that provide soft tokens and push notifications like the Rapid Identity mobile app really can help you strengthen that posture immediately, where you don't have to go procure a bunch of hardware. All you need to do is have access to a smartphone, either iOS or Android for almost all the use cases, and you can actually create that token, enroll those users, and start authenticating immediately. So that kind of brings me to the last talking point that I have here before we kick it back over to Randy, and that is the difference that identity automation is striving to make as we see people really scramble to put these infrastructures in place. And like Randy said, we're already talking like it's a learning experience, and we're only 8 weeks into it. And I think from the lessons we've learned so far going through this, we've learned that these are really the important aspects or pillars that get people deployed now and in the future when, hopefully nothing like this happens again, but if it does, are prepared to, flip that switch and go to remote work and still be as secure as they were, if not more. And where that comes into play, I think, is the configuration side. So having the ability to deploy a product, not have to go through a bunch of services or configuration to get it up and running. And with that in mind, designed to be used by the night admin or whoever is actually going to be enrolling someone. I think now that could very easily be, someone in HR or a manager. Same thing with being scalable. Just like if we have to grow that remote access, tenfold, you need to be able to scale for that. Same thing with availability. If we do push people away from their local resources or that office, what if that office loses power and no one's there to flip it back on? So being able to provide infrastructure in both the cloud and on-prem is becoming crucial. And then the last thing here is being able to get up and running and successfully securing your endpoints, in a matter of days and weeks and not months and years. I think that's about all I had, Emily. So I think we should give the floor back to Randy.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Kevin. And I really appreciated the overview that you brought there. It really kind of filled in some missing pieces for me. I just want to remind our audience, of course, if you've got a question for Kevin or Randy, don't be shy. Go ahead and throw that into the Q&A portal right now. And Randy, you're back with us. Hopefully we're going to be able to hear you really well. So I'm going to throw things back over to you.
Well, I'll just say a few sentences before we get started just to make sure my audio sounds good and everything's good from that standpoint before continuing.
You sound terrific, so we're good to go.
All right. Well, and I'll say we didn't plan this, but this is the world we've lived in for the past almost 3 months now, is rapidly changing on the fly. So, definitely not planned, but, I think we've become so accustomed to this now and switching. And Kevin I like the flip side of it from what we had talked about, because Kevin mentioned a few things that really tie into how Rowan had to adapt. And that was not needing items that need a lot of training and being able to scale as we go through. And I'm seeing audio is good, so great. Thank you. So I won't jump all the way back, but I was kind of mentioning about the county, just so everybody kind of understands what our environment is to relate to what everybody else may be dealing with. So we are supporting nearly 1,000 users, and we had a pretty good mix of desktops and laptops. So I would say our real time to start adapting to the pandemic was mid-March, and it was going into a Friday in the second week of March, and we had discussed what our items would be and working with the county manager. And as Emily had alluded, I am the chief information officer over information technology, and just 2 weeks prior had added an additional role of assistant county manager. So I was looking at IT needs in addition to all of a sudden, looking at, policies and governor's orders on a daily basis as we were going through. So, kind of a change both ways, but clearly with a technology focus and trying to make sure, and one of the big pushes is that in Rowan, there was never a close of the offices for services to citizens. And what I mean by that is we may have adjusted our office hours or building, but access and things to that point, but all of the services that we would provide would be done in some way, shape, or fashion. There were a few, like we found over time, like public library labs, that we did actually need to close just from a health perspective. But as far as adjusting for social distancing and moving to a predominant telework fashion and still trying to maintain services was one of the key goals that IoT had. So with that, we had 15 individuals in our department, still do, but we're split up into infrastructure, which maintains that virtual environment, the networking, all the connection sides, and the client side. And fortunately, over the last couple of years, we really started to ramp up our business operations and business analyst group, and that really played a part into weekly calls as we're starting to send people home with telework to understand what do you need, what services are we lacking if you have partial staff working from home. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those findings that we had and some of the adaptations that we had to make. So we moved into this predominant telework mode, and we ultimately hit a 50 to 60% of all regular users that we would normally have. And so this was across the board. This was no department excluded. The only one, of course, would be 911 dispatchers, and they operated in a mode of the dispatch center itself was a quarantine area. So that was, the reverse of the quarantine for them to operate in that environment. But all other departments that I've listed, of those 22, did have some form. In fact, all department directors were mandated to, appoint a second in command and then alternate back and forth, because at this time, from a pandemic perspective, we didn't know what the impact would be, and we wanted to make sure business continuity would be there in the event somebody would be unavailable to work for an extended period of time. So one of the first items we had in discussion was, okay, we already have virtual desktops. People are able to get to those. But if we start sending people home, what is the influx of laptop requests going to be and device to be able to work from home? We use that as an opportunity. We knew supply chain on regular, Windows laptops would be, more restrictive. And we've been working in the work anywhere, anytime, any place mindset. So we decided to, switch over to Apple products and start purchasing, those. And fortunately, there wasn't a supply chain issue from that perspective. So, we've rolled out a lot, and, being in the virtual environment, it's just running the client side. So that was, one of the ease of use to facilitate individuals going home. And tying back, one thing we did see is, of course, a lot of people have their own laptops. And so a lot of our effort turned into service desk to get people, with the clients loaded and get connected back into their environments to access their applications. At the same time, we were looking at what is this going to look like in the future. So we internally I talked with my team, and we decided instead of being a 50% telework, we would 100% work from the office, actually close our doors down, put a note on and say, by appointment only, or you can call this number. So that led to a couple of the things that we were looking at the time. We're running a over 12-year-old voice over IP system. So there needed to be some changes there. We were going to be looking at moving from PRIs to SIP trunking. It's been on our schedule and radar for a while. And now all of a sudden we're just skipping everything and jumping ahead and saying, okay, let's look at a cloud-based phone system. So that's what we went through, and we started adopting that first, got our comfort level up. That allowed us to move our service desk queues over. And within the matter of a week, we had all of our individuals working at home and were able to respond and work through requests. So for us, we were ultimately proving the point that 100% telework from an IT perspective was achievable. Now we did still say if there are people working in the office, they would drive from home and handle in-person requests, but anything that could be done remotely, that would be the first line of action, and then go out to the sites. So that was one of the agile moves from an IT perspective. We had already started rolling out multi-factor authentication. Again, to that same model, IT was first. So everybody working from home, now they're just doing it on a daily basis from IT. We had already moved one of our largest departments over to multi-factor authentication. We do use a model of the one-time passwords. We just can support the smartphones. We did purchase tokens, and it's just the time-based tokens. And they could also do phone calls. So there was a lot of, changes over on that process where, several, I would say probably 50 of the individuals in one department had set it up where it would just call their desk phone. They were always used to, getting that call and pressing, pound and getting connected. So there was some troubleshooting with them to work through to move to that. One thing we did find is, and I think everybody would find something similar, is most all of your staff do end up having smartphones or iPads somewhere in their house. And that was the other thing. Our schools, had gone on restriction. Their kids were home. So I say honestly, we found a lot of, their kids were helping them get through a lot of their technical challenges because they were already having to deal with the same thing for schoolwork. So that was really good and helpful. So what we do have, and of course our fiscal year starts July 1 to June 30, so we're looking at a complete expansion of that multi-factor authentication to hit all individuals, not just key departments. We had supply chain, we've gotten some of that taken care of, but we'll move to more laptops. The intent there is that any individual that has performed telework functions will be using a laptop going forward, as opposed to a desktop. The cost is not that prohibitive to make that transition, and there is potential for funding use there. Our biggest thing, and this is where our business analyst side, comes back into play, is individuals wanting to use printers at home. So we had to look at different ways and really just analyze each of those particular use cases. During this process, as many of you may have already gone through, you're going through budget. A lot of people want to see their numbers in front of them. So we did make special use case exceptions and try and work with a select group. Fortunately, our elections office, we do, have a large quantity of printers that go out for our one-stop voting, and just working really with all the departments to either shift and move individuals and some of their responsibilities, and even share within unused technologies based on the time of year. There was a real collaborative effort, and we did move to almost no online meetings. I can't recall anybody really doing an online meeting prior to this. To everybody was doing, at least from the director standpoint, you were doing 5 to 12 a day. And I think we've mastered the art of, a 2-minute break between meetings, where typically you'd schedule a 15 or 30-minute interval. We were literally back to back on all of our meetings, coming in one and out of another. And I think, there was, in our case, we call it a Zoom fatigue. And I think a lot of people have experienced that. And I just had not been looking at the screen that much. So I started noticing my eyes were hurting as well. So just really odd things that you just didn't notice, that now all of a sudden, I was like, well, I'm used to seeing people in person and not staring at the screen. And then hours seemed to shift a little bit, but a couple other items we had online forums. That was one of our big push from our analyst that we needed to adopt. And again, going to Kevin's point, cloud-based solutions that you could pay monthly, and that it didn't need to have a long conversation before I was able to actually enact and start. We also, because of the health department and the request, the state is putting out data as far as COVID-19 positive cases. There's a lot of potential for stay-at-home orders that could come from even the local municipal level. So everybody wanted information on, locations, any public data as it changed with CDC guidance. So we had to adapt our normal open data hub to now showing honestly a set of data that it has always been protected by communicable disease, restrictions. So it was really a challenge to keep, certain, individuals not having access to data, and then having just the one team that gets the data to be able to present online. And again, we had solutions that we were using for that, but found that it really wasn't conducive. So I worked with the team, and we literally flipped the switch overnight to a different product and kept using that. And again, it was more, monthly accounts that can transition to annual was one of our big, success factors there. And it allowed the team to be very flexible as we went through. And scalability, again, like with the multi-factor authentication, we have extended that out. Things that you can just increase the count, put in a purchasing card, and continue on your way has really been, kind of the hallmark to our ability to be successful through this. And now at this point, with budget, and especially going into reduced sales tax revenues and looking at a very tight budget, as probably many of you are now, at the same time looking at, Federal CARES Act funding and FEMA reimbursements to actually expand on telework. It's kind of a very interesting dynamic of having a very strict budget, but then at the same time having, federal funding to look at. So very challenging, but very fun time at the same. And I think with that, I'm good with any questions and can elaborate on any of those items in more detail.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Randy, for that. I feel like I know all about your county in North Carolina now, which is always good to get some visibility. So we've got a lot of questions coming into the Q&A portal, but if you've been holding back on asking your question, well, now's your chance, because we're going to do some rapid fire questions with Randy and Kevin. And Kevin, I got this question in that says, how often should you change your password while at home? And I want to expand on this question just a little bit, because I think sometimes people think security happens differently when you're not on your agency's network per se. How should you be thinking about this? And then obviously, how often should we be changing things?
Yeah, I saw that one come through. That is a absolutely great question. I think we all are dealing with now, me and Randy included, coming from a lot of our devices at home. And really it comes down to, if there is a specific policy that your organization mandates, it is recommended to follow that. In some cases, there is, based on what you guys do, or if you talk to certain pieces of the government, they will mandate certain password complexity requirements, even at your BYOD level or at your home, if you're accessing those resources. I think a good rule of thumb, if you're just looking at, password hygiene, I think just for your personal account, every 90 days is fine. I think really where we see organizations focusing is not as much necessarily on, your login to your computer at home, but more when you try and access their resources is where they're really going to enforce, the authentication or stringent complexity requirements. But I'd say for at home, just a good rule of thumb for my Windows password, we don't have any complexity requirements from Identity Automation, so I just update it every 90 days.
Wonderful. Randy, any advice there from the perch of being a CIO for a county here? How do you talk to your employees about security at home or remotely versus when you're in the office?
Yeah, we pretty much, I would like to treat it the same, but we do know that, moving to a location where you're not going to expose family members to sensitive information, that, as you had mentioned, we were behind door controls, or Kevin mentioned we were behind door controls. Now you might be sitting at your living room table, so you're not necessarily aware of who might be looking over your shoulder or see something that normally wouldn't be the case. So security awareness from that perspective, I agree with Kevin. A lot of the policies are password policies, at least from county use, is accessing state-based systems, some federal-based systems, and even cloud-based systems that enforce policies, and they're all different. So our main thing is being able to see, are there any anomalies into the logins? Am I seeing a different set or multiple authentication attempts from someone? Because that's just as important to know that even if you lock after 5 attempts, well, did you get 3 attempts from a location that you've never seen before? And actually, we went through a couple events through this, and as you would at any particular time, it's not related to the pandemic, and just kind of understand. And really, it's more about your reporting structure to have others involved, and again, utilizing that policy and incident response. And we've got a great team in North Carolina that really allows us to escalate and share that information. So.
No, that's great. And Kevin, kind of building off of what Randy was just saying, in your presentation, you were talking about the identity and access management maturity model and how this framework can help agencies stay secure. And we're kind of mentioning where a lot of agencies were falling on that. As agencies have kind of scaled and rapidly tried to deploy some of these IAM solutions during the pandemic, or even now that we're kind of in the middle of the remote work response here, what are some best practices or lessons learned that you've heard from some of your clients in government about how to get this process going successfully?
Yeah, and that is a great thing, Emily, a point to bring up. It's where do you begin, right? And I know for a lot of people, this came quickly. I think for Randy and his team, they had a lot of the pieces and the knowledge in place to move quickly and get everything up and running. But we found a lot of people are stuck with where do they begin, and kind of just pulling up our maturity model here again. Where do you begin, right? And how do I start evaluating my infrastructure and the level of maturity that my organization's at? And that is something that we do a lot with customers and prospects, of evaluating it, going through the pieces of the puzzle. But I think a great place for people to start is looking at your endpoint. So, what we're talking about today with specifically multi-factor authentication, I think it is easy jumping endpoint to say, hey, I need to, lock down this Windows login. And that is a great first step, right? If I put some type of advanced authentication or some type of multi-factor authentication in front of a Windows login that everyone's used to seeing, I think we really see that as the first stepping stone to, ultimately having, complete governance over all of your identities that are coming in and out of the organization. So when we talk about just, hey, where do I begin? I think if you look at your devices or your VPNs or now specifically like in Randy's case with VDI, enforcing multi-factor authentication there is a great place to start where you can really up your security posture with not a big lifts or changes in people's, day-to-day workflows.
Definitely. Randy, anything to add on there, or are you good?
No, I'll echo Kevin's point. I mean, especially it is, and looking at this from an implementation perspective, there's a lot of different places that you can look for multi-factor authentication, but it's the same thing in our case, looking at it at the actual login to get to that virtual desktop. The only other thing I would add, and we're kind of, looking at that single sign-on, we've gone through some federation services, and it's still a work in progress of figuring out how all the dust is going to settle. But I will say one thing that I've really tried to encourage our group to do, and this just seems to be it's becoming a best practice for us, is just ensuring that anywhere we can use an email address as the authenticating ID is great. And the reason I say that is because especially when we start mixing personal use or somebody logging in, we always see, and we're finding that on smartphones that Apple ID or Google Play IDs may be personal accounts, but yet we're trying to do mobile device management and we run into issues. So having that .gov ending on your email address, it kind of puts them in that mindset, and it lets them know, okay, this is the context I'm working in. So if they're logging into something and they're putting in that email address and it's got that RowanCountyNC.gov, then they know that they're in work mode, even if they're using a different device or a borrowed device or something to that effect. So that's kind of our take on how we want people to identify, as opposed to maybe a traditional Active Directory name that has some weird context or something. Or
yeah. Gotcha. So I got another question in here talking about, if you got any pushback about, changing some of the way, Randy, that you guys were doing things, focusing more on, say, digital services, digital responses, than having folks come to brick and mortar government offices, which were closed to the pandemic. Obviously, we are in a very unique situation right now where the health risks outweighed, some of those possible complaints that you might have had before. But I'm interested, Randy, from your perspective, if you think this push towards, more digital services, since you've been able to prove that you can do them securely and that your team is able to work from home and provide those services, is that the conversation that will continue as people kind of come back into the office space?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, to your point, at first it was, this is the right way. Let's just take it. If someone can't come in, hold on just a second. Hey.
No worries. Kevin, while Randy
apologize.
No worries. You're getting yelled at from your wife. I get it.
No, she was walking in and talking on the phone. So one of the joys from working from home is that's one of the reasons why people want to get back, is because you have so many adaptations. So it just makes it fun. To your point though, at first it was pretty straightforward. Now I think we're looking at this hybrid model where there's an expectation on both sides. So we did actually just change, tax bills are going to go out for us in July. So, mid-second week in July, folks are going to start coming in. But we still need to have an online service to deal with that as well. But at the same time, there's this physical. And yeah, actually, in our particular case, part of our plan to look at services in a hybrid form is utilizing an architect to come in and look at our building design, something we never would have thought of, that we may actually have a drive-through now for, taking tax payment. And so lots of interesting changes that just never were discussed before are coming up. But at the same time, we're not seeing that there's any decrease or pull back on having something that was available online. In fact, I just had, a discussion with a commissioner, that was interested to make sure, hey, we still have a population base that still is over the age of 65, that has the same interest. It's not going away. So I think that's where, as we move forward, we have to deal with both the in-person and that same service that's offered. So really not any pushback in general. Now, internally with staff, I will say all of Rowan County staff adapted very quickly and were able to take so many changes, and we took advantage of every single thing we could throw in from an IT perspective, because that's what we want to do all the time anyway, is give them change. So, we anybody that was a champion, we jumped on that and ran with it. Still had some challenges getting a few forms, because I did know when we were going through, there were a couple departments that really wanted just to tweak and get it just perfect, and I was like, you don't have time. We've got to get it where the individual, they can call in and get the rest of the information. So that was I guess our challenge, if any, is just people wanting to be perfectionists, which I applaud that, but at the same time, we needed to move very fast. So
definitely. And Randy, Kevin, from your perspective, a lot of what Randy was just talking about, of kind of what they went through, I feel like it makes the push for some of these digital services, the ability for people to work remotely, a little bit easier. Are you seeing that conversation shift as well, and kind of what's your perspective?
Yeah, we really are. And I think to Randy's point, there's been pushback. I think historically it was always easier, especially in public safety and things like that, to it ain't broke, don't fix it type of thing.
Yep.
And I think what we've seen, and to really attest, I think what Randy was saying, is that there has been a lot more acceptance coming through this. I think people understand it's time to go into the future. I think for better or for worse, when you see 2020, you think it's kind of the future. And there have been some significant funding bills that have been created, specifically for these use cases that are becoming available in the public spaces and also in healthcare, where I think we're going to see this get adopted way faster than we had assumed. I think, we probably were going to see this happening soon anyway, but I have a feeling that this may be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and we could really see. I think 50% of some organizations working remote coming into next year.
Definitely. Well, I can't believe how quickly the time has flown for this training, but I want to kind of end getting some closing thoughts from both of you. And Kevin, I'm going to start with you because, the theme of today's training, identity and remote work, how do you stay secure? I think that really just resonates with folks because we were just so quickly moved to a remote work situation for many, many people. And one of the things that, might have previously been overlooked a little bit more is that security piece. And so making sure that agencies are able to stay as secure as they possibly can in this new environment is so critical. So with some kind of closing thoughts here, and with that in mind, what should our audience take away from this push to remote work and keeping the security piece as a big factor in that?
I think I would recommend to, the attendees today and in general, what I'm saying to people as we get in to help solve a lot of these problems is start off with, what you can chew and what you can handle. And I think to that point that we were talking about earlier, just get started. I know there's a lot of overhead, but start exploring your options. Know that more and more support is coming. in terms of, funding and people bringing in, resources that can help you deploy those, and really just start thinking about it. And I would say start thinking about how you will do it going into the future in terms of securing people's access.
Definitely. All right, Randy, close us out here. What are one or two takeaways our audience should have when thinking about remote secure work?
Sure, and I'll piggyback off of Kevin's statement and say, as you're looking at this with your teams, you don't be afraid to, like Kevin said, take a small project, test with it. Don't be afraid, to change directions after you go. Take advantage of cloud services where you can. Multi-factor authentication is always great and should be used anywhere. At least do it with your admins and your administrative and IT staff. And from our environment, we test everything first internally and live it, so that way when we're asking others to do it, we understand what the impact is. And I think I'll leave it with that. Back over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Thank you, Randy and Kevin, for joining us. I know it's a crazy time right now, so we really appreciate you taking that busy time to share your insights with our community. A few quick reminders before we sign off. We will email you a link to the on-demand version of this training, so make sure you check your inboxes tomorrow. Also, be sure to download the additional resources on the right-hand side of your console, and please take 2 minutes to fill out the feedback survey as well. Our goal with these trainings is to help you do your job better. We really appreciate and value the work that you do every day. So thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. On behalf of GovLoop and Identity Automation, I hope you enjoyed our training, and we'll see you at the next one.